We've gone through every team's NFL draft, division by division, team by team here on Peacock and Williamson. Now it's time to talk rookie fantasy, specifically Matt Williamson's rookie Dynasty ranking. So not only this year, but looking ahead at this rookie class, how should they perform in the fantasy universe on today's Peacock and Williamson?
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of P&W is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right. So shout out to the everydayers, those of you that listen to this program. I know we've been kind of teasing this for a while, and now that we've done all the post-draft reviews of all the teams and all the players, Matt, we have a pretty good idea of how these players are going to start to look and start to fit in, and OTAs are starting around the league. We might have some news about that later on in the week, but let's focus on these rookies now in the NFL, and everybody out there knows that Matt also co-hosts the Locked On Dynasty podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Been doing fantasy analysis for years, decades, I might even say, Matt. I think that would be accurate. And so let's get into this rookie class and your Dynasty rankings. So, for me, when I do Dynasty rankings, I'm not looking 9 years ahead. I'm looking 2-3 years ahead, right? So you want Dynasty rookies that are good still now, so it is pertinent to just year-long fantasy leagues, but you're also looking ahead a little bit, and maybe there's a running back that needs a little bit of help before he actually becomes the guy, but you love the player so much that factors into a Dynasty ranking, maybe a little bit more than a year-long fantasy league. So looking at a long-term Dynasty outlook for these rookies in a fantasy perspective, let's start with quarterbacks and get into your rankings this season.
Yeah, and so real quick, I'm not super impressed with this class overall. I mean, there's not a Ja'Marr Chase wide receiver. Great that it's a great tight end class, but tight ends, anyone who plays fantasy realizes that's not, you're not something you're probably going to draft that super high. The quarterbacks are intriguing, and then we're going to dig into that right away. So I have Anthony Richardson clearly number one, and I have heard arguments that I would take Stroud or Young over Richardson because in 8 years, I think Young or Stroud has a better chance to be a starter than Richardson. And I'll combat that by saying I don't really care, to be honest with you, because if I draft Richardson and 2 years from now he's out of the league, well, then I'll just trade something cheap for Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers or Matthew Stafford. Like, you can get quarterbacks cheap in non-superflex leagues and Dynasty all the time. I can get Derek Carr for a third-round rookie pick. Chase Brown might be worth more than Derek Carr in some people's eyes right now. So you can always get someone that you can live with. So I'm always going to swing for the fences and try to find, well, let's just use these names: Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, RG3, Colin Kaepernick, guys that were extremely fantasy relevant before they were even good quarterbacks, and let alone good passers.
It's what we saw from Justin Fields last year, right? So you're probably hoping you're going to get something similar to 2022 Justin Fields, which was his second year, with rookie year Anthony Richardson, right? If you're putting him at QB1, even if he's not quite there as a passer, there's too much explosive ability to create points in the run game, and then a few throws here and there.
Absolutely. So I think he'll be the opening day starter, but I'm not going to bet every dollar I own on that. But it won't be long no matter what before he's a starter. At a minimum, I can almost guarantee he'll be active week one with a Lamar rookie year package involved. He's out there for 10 snaps a game, 2 drives, whatever. He's a total curveball. And you don't start him then, but at least you see him. He's not just buried on the depth chart, and he won't be buried for long. And we mentioned Fields, Allen, Hurts. in terms of a runner, he might be better than all of them. I mean, it's possible.
With his athleticism and the size that goes along with it, he's certainly one of the biggest and the most athletic. You look at Cam; he's a little more athletic than Cam. Cam was bigger. Justin Fields ran a little faster. I think in his pro days 4.4 flat instead of Richardson's 4.44, but that was at the combine. So like at least it's a tie with some of the the most athletic guys. Not counting Lamar Jackson that we can never count in any of these conversations, or Michael Vick maybe.
And unlike a Vick or a Kyler, he will be the Hurts, Josh Allen goal line runner too. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of 1-yard touchdowns in his future too, which is great for fantasy.
How often is the third quarterback in the draft your QB1 for fantasy immediately?
Yeah, that is odd, but I mean, it's more style play. I mean, certainly Lamar, he was the 4th or 5th that year, Darnold, Rosen, et cetera, et cetera. He was immediately the QB1 in rookie drafts, I mean, just because style of play. And people are smarter about that now than ever in terms of running. And, some people didn't love Burrow, doesn't run enough. He was first pick in the draft. And frankly, I think that's a concern with Young and Stroud. And I don't think either one's going to be more than 200 yards a year, something like that.
And you could argue the skill guys are better for Richardson than they are Young and Stroud as well. So, more fantasy upside there.
So the Locked On Dynasty League that you and I are in is 2 quarterbacks. Yeah. But Superflex is more and more popular, where you have to start 1 quarterback, but you can start 2, and you're crazy if you don't. There is an argument that Richardson should be the first pick overall, but generally speaking, Bijan is a slam dunk in any format, especially standard stuff. But Richardson's in the conversation for number 2 in Superflex. I mean, that's how valuable he is.
So you've got the third quarterback selected this year in the draft as your QB1 for fantasy and Dynasty going into the year. So how do Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, that no doubt are, the next 2 in some order, how do they rank for you?
They're basically a dead tie. I mean, if someone out there, or if you have a strong conviction of one versus the other, I'm all ears. My biggest knock on Young from an NFL perspective, from a Peacock and Williamson perspective, was durability and size. Well, if he gets hurt, I can find Kirk Cousins for nothing. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't change my tune all that much. Sure, I want my quarterback to play 17 games for fantasy, but if he doesn't, I can always find someone that's suitable. I mean, so that doesn't kill him. I put Young over Stroud barely. I mean, I think he's a little bit more of a playmaker. I kind of like Stroud's weapons slowly developing in Houston right now. Like, that offense doesn't look horrific to me. And I think both these guys, durability aside, should be solid starting NFL quarterbacks, which has a fair amount of value. But in terms of, normal leagues, these guys are going in like the mid-second round of rookie drafts, where Richardson goes like 6, 7, 8 overall, something like that.
So just to drive the point home of why Richardson is QB1 in fantasy over Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, unless he's such a disaster that he's not on the field at all, you look back at what we just talked about, that Justin Fields sort of
cheat
fantasy profile. That's better than, even than better prospects that were number 1 pick quarterbacks that operate more from the pocket were as rookies, right? Like Justin Fields last year was more valuable in fantasy than Trevor Lawrence was as a rookie. Right.
He's more valuable than Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Right.
So that's where the fantasy cheat code comes in. And obviously, Bryce Young was drafted number 1 overall for a reason, but with the weapons around him as a rookie, it's hard to project much early. And then obviously if all these guys hit their ceiling, then Richardson's still more valuable. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, especially a quarterback, I really only care about ceiling, and I'm hoping to land the next Hurts, Lamar, and those guys are going really high in redraft right now. Allen, Mahomes, of course. I don't know that Young or Stroud can get there for fantasy. They may win 6 Super Bowls, but I don't think they can get there for fantasy where they're going to put up the numbers Allen or Hurts does every week. But they still have value, and we'll talk about this at some other positions. I mean, if you're good at playing Dynasty, you look at things like you and I discussed these last couple of weeks and say, well, the Panthers and the Texans have a ton of cap space next year. What do you think they're going to do? Well, they're probably going to sign a good receiver or somehow land a good receiver. It's going to get better for them, as it has for Fields.
And another point you made about Kirk Cousins. you're probably starting Kirk Cousins over Bryce Young anyway. So you're not
Right.
even waiting for Bryce, like early. I'm talking rookie season wise, like to
No
start.
doubt.
If you have Young and Cousins, you're starting Cousins in week 1 and waiting to see on Bryce Young. So you don't have to wait for him to get hurt before you're putting Cousins in there, right? But with Anthony Richardson, if he's starting, you're probably swinging for that upside and letting Richardson start for you. And maybe at least after you've seen a little bit.
Probably, depending who else you have, but yes, I think that there's strong argument for that just based on run. So this is a conversation Brian and I have had for years on the air. Is Dynasty is really interesting from what time of year it is. So like right now is rookie draft season galore. I'm in 3 of them as we speak, that there's a pick like every hour somehow. And people are loving Nathaniel Tank Dell, boy, that's going to be my next rookie, or whoever it is, Brenton Strange or whoever, some rookie you think you're super smart on. But this is still a week-to-week game where Sunday morning you have to check a box to play somebody that's going to get you the most points. And that's not Tucker Kraft or Nathaniel Dell. That's some boring, grizzled veteran like Kirk Cousins,
Right. Someone that's got a jersey on and they're going to field a lot more, and you're hoping they get that touchdown.
Right. So, I mean, that's what's funny about playing Dynasty is if in my rookie draft, I'm trying to trade Kirk Cousins for a pick. Okay, and I'm not picking on Cousins. I'm going to get like a late second for him, which is like Roschon Johnson value. But the chances of me starting Cousins versus Roschon Johnson on week 1 is way different. Or even like when we talked about running backs, it's crazy. Like you can't get anything for Dalvin Cook right now, but he's going to start on every fantasy team in week 1.
All right, we got to finish up the quarterbacks here. Not a very long conversation for the rest of the group after those first rounders. And then obviously running back is the position when it comes to fantasy, and the player of this rookie class in Bijan Robinson next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. There's no better place to bet all the fantasy playoff action than America's #1, all the playoff action. I got fantasy on the brain right now. But it's not just NBA playoffs, by the way, at America's #1 sports book, FanDuel. There's NHL playoffs happening. Of course, we got Major League Baseball, and there's NFL futures as well. Tons of NFL to bet on, even though it is the off season. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's finish up the quarterback dynasty rookie rankings here for 2023, Matt. We've got Richardson, Young, Stroud is how you have them ordered up with a virtual tie between Young and Stroud. Now, there's a big gap between Will Levis because there was a big gap in how they're drafted, which means there's a big gap in how they're going to be played and allowed to play in the NFL. So my next question actually is, okay, Will Levis is your 4th quarterback. That shouldn't surprise anybody. Sure. But how big is the gap, and how many of these quarterbacks would you even draft in a dynasty league at this point if it was a 1 quarterback league versus a 2 quarterback league?
Well, I mean, this is really going back, but I remember my first ever rookie draft. This tells you I have been doing this for decades. My last pick in the 4th round, I'm going to take this short little quarterback from Wisconsin named Russell Wilson. I mean, there's some nice OTA buzz about him. I'll pick him up. I started him for 10 years, so like, I mean, there's some value there. Remember, he was a 3rd round pick that, he was a good football player, but he's short, blah, blah, blah. So there's a better chance that Hendon Hooker, let alone even Jake Hayner, Stetson Bennett, is at least in the league 5 years from now versus Dwayne McBride or Sean Tucker or some running back. But we always use the term roster clogger. Like if you draft Will Levis this year, you're not going to get 1 point out of him. Probably. You're definitely not. Hooker's a perfect example. He might be worth grabbing in the 3rd or 4th round because you might be happy about it 5 years from now in a Russell Wilson like manner. But that's a whole roster spot that sits there and gets you a 0 all year. I mean,
and he's too valuable to drop.
Right. He's a roster
trade him. So he just sits there on your roster and you have to hope for a couple years.
Nobody's going to trade for him, or no one's beating down your door to get him, unless something great happens. Levis, they benched Tannehill in week 10 Levis comes in and lights it up in week 11, kind of like Purdy or whatever,
Well, I think that's not a crazy
it's
possibility
possible.
for Levis. And I think it's much more likely for Levis to play this year than Hendon Hooker. So I think there should be a sort of, he's in his own tier, right?
He's
with
in his own tier.
Big gap after the first rounders. And I think there's a huge gap. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be super excited about drafting the rest of them in a 2-quarterback league. I might take a shot at Bennett just because you don't know what Stafford's shoulder is going to be like all year, but it would be tough to roster any of these guys after Levis.
It is. I mean, there has to be really deep leagues. Clayton Tune might start the season, but he's no way he's a Cardinals long-term starter. But Levis does have a fair amount of value in any league because, sure, he might be a roster clogger, but I'll bet almost everything I own he's the Titans' opening day starter next year. So that's not so bad to wait.
So Levis 4, and then what's in Hooker 5? What's your order for those mid-round quarterbacks then?
They're kind of all the same. I went Haener, Bennett, and I think Bennett actually has a pretty good chance to play this year for the Rams. Jaron Hall, Clayton Tune, but in a standard league, don't bother.
And after those first 9, it's pretty much unrankable, and probably I would guess maybe your top 7 after Bennett. I would guess none of the other guys get drafted unless, and even in some 2-quarterback dynasty leagues.
Right, I think that's 100% true. Although it's this year because your boy Purdy. People are taking a shot here and there on these dudes that are super late round, 6th, 7th round NFL picks, thinking they're the next one. But we all know that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it's probably not likely. But if it is, I like Tune, and I like Bennett, and I like Haener to be that guy.
Stetson Bennett could be the Rams starter for 10 games this year.
I would probably add the UCLA quarterback there. I know he's behind Sean Watson. I'd put him in there at 10, I think. And
I think that's where
he belongs in that tier. DTR. Actually.
That's not much different than most of these guys, but he absolutely needs an injury. It's not like Stafford's going to retire or Kyler's not going to come back.
Right.
Watson could be the worst quarterback in the league, and they're not going to bench him.
Let's move on to running backs here. Bijan Robinson, the apple of every fantasy drafter's eye. Atlanta Falcons pick number 8 overall, is the number 1 running back in any format you play among rookies, and he's getting drafted high in redraft leagues as a first-round player. My question is, how much is, they had a 1,000-yard rookie back last year. So is it going to be just all his backfield? You think it would be since he was the 8th pick in the draft, but is there a chance that one of these other rookies actually outproduces Bijan Robinson, Matt?
I think it's possible. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is the obvious other one that's going to get, has first-round capital, isn't really blocked. I mean, those two are standalone in the running back ranks this year. It's possible, but if you use the 8th pick in the draft on what I think is the best running back prospect that I've ever seen, I mean, he deserves to be 1-1 in every rookie draft. And how about this, BP? I mean, he is already the highest ranked, the most valuable dynasty running back, period, over McCaffrey, over Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall, that's how this works. Like Barkley was the same way. Before he ever put on a Giants uniform, he was the first running back drafted in the entire dynasty community, because it goes back to your point all the time. These guys just don't last. I mean, you almost have to when you rank running backs, not rookies so much, it's almost not that much different than redraft rankings. Thinking about, I can hang on to this guy for 4 years and he'll be fine. Don't think that way. Like we'll talk about Tajay Spears here pretty soon. Okay, he doesn't have an ACL, so he's only going to play what, 3 or 4 years? Why is that different than Israel Bonaconda or Evan Hull, or what I mean? They all are going to play 3 or 4 years.
It just gives you a reason not to buy into that running back that's getting into his second contract because he doesn't get a second contract.
Right, exactly. One of the smartest, you wouldn't know who he is, but he's the commissioner of one of our leagues. I watch, he does it every year, and he's always in the running for the dynasty title. He always has a great stable of running backs, and when they get to be about the 3rd or 4th year, he dumps them for future firsts and just keeps drafting running backs, and he always has guys that are like 3 years or younger at the running back position, and he has lots of them. And churned, like he's dumping Nick Chubb right now, before he turns into Dalvin Cook status, and he's getting future first for him and drafting running backs with him. Like if you can pull that off, it works well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it. So what's the gap here between Bijan Robinson at number 1 and RB2 Jahmyr Gibbs?
So Superflex aside, they're clearly the top 2 picks for me. I mean, like again, there's no Jamar Chase, so I think there's maybe a smaller gap than people realize. Bijan's 1, Gibbs is 2. We can talk about who's 3 or whatever, but they're almost every league you look at, they're the first 2 picks, as they should be. Because, we talked about running as a cheat code for quarterbacks. It's not quite to that extreme, but catching the football is a cheat code for running backs. And Gibbs is going to have a lot of receptions.
I know there was a big gap in where they were drafted. James Cook was a second rounder last year, but I think there could potentially be a slower start than people are realizing, with Jahmyr Gibbs being that every down sort of a player. Even if he's valuable and he's explosive, he's not a tackle breaker. So he might not get a lot of early down work with, David Montgomery in town. And
Montgomery's a very good receiver and a bigger bodied.
And probably a better pass protector day one.
That's where I was going. I mean, anytime that people get too excited about these running backs, because half the guys we're going to talk about are not NFL caliber pass protectors, and you can't put them out there until they are.
All right, this is where the rubber meets the road here. Zach Charbonnet is your RB3, Matt. Yeah. How tough was it to put him over some others, even though he's drafted higher? He's got a lot more competition in his Seattle backfield.
So, because with Locked On Dynasty, I had rookie ranks going into the draft. And everyone in the world had Bijan 1, Gibbs 2, Charbonnet 3. No one that we're going to talk about in these rookie ranks got a bigger hit or a loss in value with landing spot than Charbonnet. So he used to go like 5th in rookie drafts. Now you can get him like the end of the first round. I still like the player. Kenneth Walker gets hurt like every running back does, as we talk about. Charbonnet is going to be really valuable, but he did take a hit. I mean, he's a distant third now.
I mean, we saw with Kenneth Walker last year because he needed injuries for him to become the guy. And then it finally happened. It's like, cool, I got this, this massive dynasty valuable running back. It's like, oh man, did they draft a second round running back the next year? So that's what kind of brings me to the next portion of this running back rankings. And we'll finish up here with some of the other players. Is you really like a guy, but he was a mid-round pick. If the Seattle Seahawks can draft a second round running back after finding, a rookie of the year candidate running back the year before, then any of these other teams could draft a running back over the top of the guy that you're drafting in your dynasty league and hoping to get a long-term player. But at the same time, you might find a super long-term stud that doesn't get someone drafted over the top of them. So let's get into this. This is where I think it gets most interesting on today's episode is the running back rankings. Yeah, from 4 through, we'll see how far we go, 20 maybe, in Matt Williamson's Dynasty rookie running back rankings next. And thank you once again, everybody, all the everydayers out there for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day. Make sure you subscribed up on YouTube. You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts. And remember, your team is covered right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Matt, running back 4 in 2023 for you in Dynasty drafts is?
Kendre Miller of the Saints. Kamara's likely to get suspended. Kamara's on that Dalvin Cook tier of stock is just falling through the floor right now in Dynasty. I don't think Miller's a great player, but landing spot and draft capital are pretty strong. He was drafted pretty high, So
what I love about Dynasty leagues is depending on what your strategy is, different things could happen. For example, in our Locked On Dynasty League, Matt, congratulations on your successful first year in the league, by the way. You traded me a superstar running back, Derrick Henry, before the season. Because I was all in. I was going all in. I had lost in the finals the year before. I was like, I know you don't trade for older running backs, but I didn't care. I was drafting late in the rounds, and I was like, give him to me. And it worked out well. I had a good season. But it worked out even better for you because you had an even better season than I did your first year in the league in this rebuild, and you got extra draft picks out of it. So
and to be honest, I kind of outkicked my coverage, to be honest, because I inherited a team, so I kind of looked at it like I want my guys. Henry's still an asset. I dumped a couple other similar players for picks, youth, total rebuild, and it worked out. But I mean, part of it was because I picked up Brock Purdy in week 10 for nothing, something like that. But I was kind of ahead of schedule there. So that league worked out quite well.
Yeah. Sometimes better be lucky than good.
Yeah. That wasn't the plan. I didn't think I was a contender.
For those listening, I was good. He was lucky. We'll
exactly. I also benefited from the DeMar Hamlin game quite a bit. That's
right. Yeah.
So many things. In my most high priced leagues, that game destroyed me. But in this one that we're not playing for anything, it benefited me. So, man,
just for pride versus the other hosts.
Right. But I get to talk about this one on the air.
Yeah, that's true. That's worth more than money, Matt.
Yeah. Banners hang forever.
So Robinson, Gibbs, Charbonnet, Kendre Miller is running back 4 for you, Matt. And
this area.
Let's go through the rest of these. We got Tajay Spears is running back 5, Tank Bigsby 6, and Devin Achane 7.
So let's start with Achane. So I talked about my pre-draft ranks, and I had Achane at like 10 because he's tiny. I mean, I know he's different than most, and he can handle and run between the tackles, and he can break tackles here and there. History just shows when you're that size, you're bad at fantasy. And so he wasn't for me. And I even said on the air going into the draft, the only way I would consider really bumping him up is if he lands with the Dolphins. Well, he lands with the Dolphins. And I moved him to 7. The rest of the world has him fighting Charbonnet at 3. Like he went 6th overall in a rookie draft I just did. And 8th or 9th, and not to me. I mean, I think his landing spot is wonderful. I don't know how many times he's going to see the field, though. Like, maybe I'm wrong on him, but I'm very low on Achane compared to consensus.
Yeah, the hype's getting a little weird with Achane right now, and I would have been all about. I was like, "Ooh, good landing spot. If you get him at running back 10, okay, I'm with it. See
right,
what he's got, stash him, But if you're expecting that role from him, I don't see how, because he just projects as a return man, change of pace guy, period. Right. That's how he projects, and he could be an amazing one of those, and he's super athletic, but he's small. He's not going to be a guy who carries the load, and if he carries the load, traditionally, those guys don't last that long. So we'll see what it ends up looking like, and he's got competition to get carries too and touches.
Right,
so even if he's useful in the passing game, it's possible in year one that Achane has is a kick returner and has, I don't know,
end around guy
and 15 misses on the season.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so he's not for me. He kind of reminds me of the Ted Ginn, Deshaun Jackson wide receiver. Like in best ball, he might have an 80-yarder in week 10 and win you the week, but he might get 2 points other weeks. You know what I mean? Like that's not for me unless you're playing best ball.
We'll see what it looks like with Achane, but yeah, little much on the hype train for Achane because of his profile for me. Tajay Spears, an interesting one. You mentioned him. I love how fun he is to watch.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's a path for him to play, and he's kind of one of those guys where he's going to end up time sharing even after this year. If he ends up with the role, he's kind of going to have another guy at some point who will get drafted and added to the mix later. So from a dynasty perspective, I'm kind of lower on Achane and Spears both than most people, I think.
I understand that, and most years, again, Spears would not be my 5th running back. I mean, there's a lot of questions. He's missing an ACL. He's behind Derrick Henry. To your point, can he be a 20 to 25 touch guy? I have my doubts. Even if Henry is traded at the trade deadline, they'll probably sign or draft a 240-pound back that's not named Derrick Henry. You know what I mean? Like that always comes at this position. Like you think you're so smart as a dynasty owner that Chase Brown's going to take over for Joe Mixon. Well, then they draft one in the 2nd round and just ruin your dreams because there's so many of
them. Speaking of Chase Brown, I think the next group of running backs is the ones I would be targeting personally as a dynasty owner versus chasing some of the Achanes and the Spears of the world, because you can get them later, and I don't think there's a big difference in value. And that starts with your running back 8, Zach Evans, 9, Roschon Johnson, Bears running back, and Chase Brown, and even Evan Hull, who are 10 and 11 for you. Evan Hull's are really interesting. They could carve out a pass catching role in the NFL early in his career.
Evan Hull's one of my favorites and never is mentioned in this neighborhood. I expect him to be Jonathan Taylor's true backup that also can catch the ball, and that offense is going to run the ball really well. Back to our Richardson conversation, Hull's already good in protection. Coaches adore him. I think he's an easy one. Chase Brown looks like Mixon's true handcuff, which has a lot of value, and who knows how long Mixon will be around. Zach Evans was a late pick, but all he really has for competitions, Cam Akers. I mean, there's some other dudes there, but that was a 5-star recruit.
The Rams would have traded Cam Akers for a bag of chips.
Right. We both said a bag of chips at the same time. That's funny.
That was the exact value. It was one bag of chips. It didn't. I think it was Schefter who's like, they're asking for a bag of chips. Can't find it.
Nobody will do it. But like Roschon Johnson, I don't like his. Do you like Roschon's landing spot? I mean, they signed Foreman and Herbert's there. And
I see here. The reason I don't like it is because they signed a running back that fits his role kind of, as a bigger back. And then I like Herbert. And I think Herbert should be the number one there.
Me too.
That means he's the 3, but at the same time, Herbert's got some injury. I think, they're 1-year deals.
So going to pillage stuff.
I think there is a path to him, and I like it, but it has to be for the right price. But I do like Roschon Johnson. I like his landing spot, and next year he could be the number 1. So there's kind of a path there, but it is murky, and I think it's not quite like the Seattle backfield, but it's like if you can get a value on any of those running backs with the Bears, you take it. But it's hard to expect a ton just because you don't know how the touches are going to shake out.
Mm-hmm. And there are backs in Dynasty that are like, this is Isaiah Pacheco land a year ago. When we look back, were we really that worried about McKinnon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire? It happens every year where a young guy gets on the field, he has fresh legs and is in a good offense. I mean, that could be Evan Hull.
After Hull at 11, let's go through this really quick so people remember what the rankings are. We got Robinson.
Actually, this one's a decent example too.
Okay, so we got Robinson, Gibbs, Charbonnet, 1, 2, 3. Then it's Miller, Spears, Tank Bigsby, Devin Achane, Zach Evans, Roschon Johnson, Chase Brown, and Evan Hull at 11, which brings us to Chris Rodriguez at 12, Eric Gray 13, Izzy Abanaconda at 14, Sean Tucker 15. I don't know where the tiers break for you. I'm just going to go through your list of 20 here.
Yeah, these are pretty low down the list. Right.
Abanaconda 14, Sean Tucker 15, Dwayne McBride 16, Tyon Evans, 17. Kenny McIntosh, some might know his name, at 18. Deneric Prince at 19. And the 5'5" Deuce Vaughn at 20. Kenny McIntosh, disrespect, not only by teams in the draft, Matt, but by your dynasty rankings as well.
I know. I like him a lot, but they draft a running back every year, and he was the second one drafted this year. And
yeah, it's tough.
He could catch a lot of balls, but I mean, his landing spot's brutal. I mean, so like going into the draft, he was like 12th for me, but I had to dump him to 18 because maybe he doesn't even make the team. I don't know. I mean, or it's a practice squad.
You would almost hope that he does get waived and another team claims him. That'd be better for his fantasy perspectives.
It would. And at the running back position, some of these dudes didn't even get drafted in the NFL. It's not uncommon to see 4th round dynasty rookie selections of undrafted free agents.
Right. And, so guys with speed, guys that are in a good situation. And there's a lot of talented running backs, and it's the position that undrafted free agents can really shine in the NFL and sometimes very early in their careers. Chris Rodriguez at 12, though, as a player.
That's the one I wanted to mention. And we can wrap this. So Ryan's crush going into the draft was Izzy Abanaconda. So that broke his heart because, I mean, Breece Hall, and unless we're missing something, is Hall more injured than we know, or you know what I mean? And Izzy fits that Niner system really well. But boy, they also have Carter. Like, his landing spot hurt his stock bad. Where Rodriguez is the opposite. I mean, for people who don't know, he's a commander. Well, Gibson's Antonio Gibson's a free agent after this year. Robinson's fine, but Chris Rodriguez might be as good as Robinson. They're similar hard-charging dudes. Like, there's really nothing in front of them that's that scary by running back ranks.
And, of course, all of these guys are one play away from jumping up in the depth chart, and some of them means that they're one play away from being RB1 on their respective NFL teams. So,
yeah, many of these guys will be at some point in the year.
Who's your guy? Who's the league winner this year, Matt, of the quarterbacks and running backs?
Ooh. We didn't talk about Tank Bigsby much, and I like ATN, but Bigsby might lead that team in carries.
Ooh, okay, there we go. Tank
Jaguars.
Bigsby.
Yeah. I've been getting him a lot mid-second round.
I like it. I like that a lot. All right. Fantastic stuff. That is Matt Williamson's dynasty quarterback and running back rankings for 2023. Let us know how you feel about them. If you love the rankings, as always, you can find me on Twitter at BD Peacock. If you did not like the rankings, Matt is at Williamson NFL. Tomorrow, we're going to come back and talk pass catchers, wide receivers, and tight ends in 2023 dynasty drafts right here. Peacock and Williamson.